So my wife and I were watching this video, how to make your own girly games, and there was some great advice in there, even if, like me, you're not looking to make girly games. And the best piece of advice was this.
But one of the ways that you can prepare to make your big game is by breaking it down into features and then making a tiny game based on each part. Are you following?
And I pretty much stopped paying attention after that because just framing it that way kind of blew my mind. I've been making unfinished game prototypes for half a decade now, and the advice to build tiny games just went in one ear and out the other. But making tiny games that are secretly little steps along the way to making a big monster of a game really gets the gears turning for me. And I only get a few random hours in the week to work on game dev anyway, so this was a really cute way to convince myself to do something actually achievable. My big dream game idea is basically just Paper Mario, so I sat down and made a list of a bunch of individual mechanics in Paper Mario, down to things like pressing A to defend an attack and giving items to NPCs. And once I did that, I tried to come up with some games that I could build around each individual mechanic. The first one of these is about that defense mechanic. In Paper Mario, you can press A right before an enemy attacks you to reduce the amount of damage they deal, and you can do the same when you're jumping on an enemy to increase the amount of damage you deal. So my first challenge was to build a game around the mechanic of timing a button press. My first thought was to make a very simple rhythm game, something like Rhythm Heaven, but then I realized that timing the button press to the music is not exactly the same as Paper Mario, and I wanted to build the mechanic off of animation, not music. And then sudden inspiration struck, and I realized that baseball has this mechanic too. So I locked into the idea of hit a baseball with a baseball bat by swinging at the right time. I built the whole game in about 4 dedicated hours, split across 3 weeks, and you can play it right now in your browser on itch.io. It's really tiny and pretty unfair, like the old Flash games I used to play on addictinggames.com. If you're interested in a breakdown of those 4 hours, that's what I'll talk about for the rest of this video. Otherwise, go play it, I guess, and share your high score here. Mine is 18. So I knew I wanted to do some frame-by-frame animation for this so I could get familiar with Godot's animation system. At first, my idea was to try and rotoscope a real baseball player swinging a bat. I went to Wikimedia and luckily found one usable clip in profile of just that. But I couldn't figure out how to import the video as frames into Procreate, so I just gave up on the idea of rotoscoping and decided to just wing it. I spent a bunch of time pausing on just the right frames and tried to copy them into this one solid, blobby human shape, and I think it turned out alright. After 4 frames, I felt like this was good enough. Actually, I was pretty proud of it. About a week later, I sat down and pulled this into Godot, and so the second hour of development was spent just getting an animation player node working with the frames. I just placed the frames in at equal intervals, and I tied this to a button press, and it was fun to get this guy swinging in response. Then I added an area 2D node with a collision shape that matches the position of the bat in the third frame, and I used the animation player to enable it only for that frame. Once this was done, I needed to give him something to swing at. So I made a ball with a sprite that just has a gradient texture. And I made this ball spawner script that ended up doing most of the work for the game. I had the idea already to use a path 2D to just make the ball follow some preset paths, and the paths would all intersect the batter's area 2D. To get this working at first, I made a bunch of Path 2D nodes as children of the ball spawner and wrote some code to randomly enable one of these children, set the ball as a child of that path's path follow, and then every frame progress the path follow by some value. This worked all right, and I was able to make the ball and path reset if you hit the ball or if it reaches the end of the path, so I knew I had the mechanic working. But I realized that instead of having all these Path 2D children, I could just have one and make a list of curved 2D resources that the ball spawner can set randomly for the path. So for hour number 3, I made that change and it turned out a lot cleaner. Once that was working, I made about 50 curves, which was somehow both tedious and fun. And then I made some signals to hook up the UI for your current score and completed the game loop by stopping the game and resetting your score when you miss 3 balls. Finally, I made it so if you hit the ball, a new curve is generated between the ball's position and this marker 2D off screen, so the ball looks like it's being hit. For hour number 4, I wanted to add a little more polish, so I fixed up the UI and added a strike counter. I wanted to add a hit stop effect, but when I actually got it into the game, the animation is just so minimal that it looked more like the game was broken than any kind of juicy effect. I considered adding some screen shake and particles and such to really uh, make it hit harder, but I decided that was going too far for this tiny game, so I just removed the hit stop altogether. Exporting the game was surprisingly time consuming. It probably took 30 minutes just to figure out the right settings and how to get it running on itch.io. That's not a huge amount of time, but I guess it's like 12.5% of the project. So that was the whole process. Overall, I'm happy with it. I think Cute Game Club had some really good advice. This was really achievable. It taught me quite a bit about Godot, and even though it still only took me 4 hours, I was still forced to complete a game. And that means doing some things that you don't normally do when you're prototyping unfinished game mechanics, like building a game over system or UI or figuring out how to export. And it also just feels good to say, hey, I finished this. And in the future, when I want to implement this Paper Mario style timed hit mechanic, I've done that before. So I definitely think I'll try to build out the rest of these games, and I'll try to keep making videos about them like this one. And if you're interested in that, stick around, leave some comments, yada yada. Anyway, that's all from me, so have a good one.